This is the Databricks Data Engineer podcast. Data quality might be the most talked about discipline on any Databricks platform, and the least witnessed. By the end, you'll have a one-question test for your data quality framework. 30 seconds to know if it's alive or just well documented. Fair warning, you might not love the answer. This one started with an architecture review a colleague told me about. One quiet question from the back of the room. I haven't looked at an expectation suite the same way since. Let me start with why this matters, because this is not a dunk on data quality. The opposite. Every number your company argues about flows through tables you own. The revenue in the board deck. The forecast finance signs off on. When one of those numbers goes quietly wrong, you don't lose compute. You lose trust. A pipeline that's down is an incident. A pipeline that's up and wrong is a betrayal. So the talk is justified. The decks, the working groups, the budget line. So why is the discipline with the loudest talk the one with the fewest confirmed witnesses? Here's where the Yeti comes in. Stay with me. This metaphor carries the whole episode. In the Himalayas, the evidence for the Yeti is everywhere. Footprints in the snow, blurry photos, a guide who knows a man who saw one, a century of expeditions, and not one confirmed sighting. Data quality frameworks have the same evidence problem. The Great Expectations suite in the repo, the Lakeflow declarative pipelines expectations on every bronze table, the Lakehouse monitoring dashboard, the slide in the kickoff deck, footprints, all of it. A sighting is something else, a real incident, caught and stopped by the framework before a stakeholder noticed. Footprints prove a team talked about data quality. Only a sighting proves it works. Which brings me back to that architecture review. A platform team is presenting their data quality setup, and honestly, it's impressive. Expectations on every ingestion table, drift metrics on the dashboard, footprints as far as the eye can see. Then an engineer from the finance side, call her Lisa, asks the only question that counts. When did this last catch something before one of us did? Silence. To their credit, they walked back through their last 3 data incidents. Incident 1. An upstream service started sending dollars where it used to send cents. The revenue dashboard dropped 99% overnight, found by an analyst. Incident 2. A feed landed on schedule but a day stale. Monday's numbers looked suspiciously like Sunday's, found by a vice president. Incident 3. A schema change upstream nulled out a join key, found by, you can guess, a stakeholder squinting at the dashboard. 3 incidents, same fingerprint on all 3. The framework slept through everyone. Lisa's question has a name now, at least in my head. I call it the sighting test. Name the last real incident your data quality setup caught before a human did. Not what it could catch, what it actually caught, with a date attached. If there's an answer, you have a sighting. If there's a pause, and then a story about coverage, you have footprints. Once you start running the sighting test, the contrasts stack up fast. A team says, we have expectations on all our pipelines. Open the pipeline and look at what happens on a violation. Nothing. The checks count failures into the event log and wave every row through. That's not a quality gate. That's a smoke detector with the speaker removed. It gets worse. A team says, our suite has hundreds of checks. Read them. Not null. Correct type. Value in range. Now read the incident history. A column that loaded fine but changed meaning. A table that went stale. A distribution that quietly drifted. The checks pass. The data lies. And then there's my favorite. Alerts go to a dedicated channel. Click into that channel. 400 unread notifications. Muted within a month of launch. When an alert has no owner and no consequence, it isn't an alert. It's a log line with better marketing. Sound familiar? I want to be careful here because none of this is a story about lazy engineers. A check doesn't get flipped to warn mode out of malice. The interesting question isn't whether your framework is dead, it's who killed it. There are two suspects. Suspect 1 is the installation itself. The standard rollout is almost engineered to produce footprints. It starts with checks chosen by what's easy to write, not by what actually breaks. Null checks are one line. Type checks come free. But your worst incidents weren't exotic. A stale feed, a nulled key, both cheap one-line checks. They never got written because nobody decided those tables needed them. Not an expense problem, a decision nobody made. That's a search party combing the valley where the walking is easy. The creature lives up on the ridge. Then comes the deadline. The night before a release, a check blocks the load. And a tech lead says the sentence that has killed more frameworks than any outage. Set it to warn for now. We'll revisit after the release. Let me say this plainly. Warn mode is a one-way door. Flipping a check back to blocking means volunteering to own the next 2 in the morning failure. So the revisit never comes, and for now, quietly becomes forever. You're probably thinking, warn mode is a feature. You profile a table before you enforce on it. You're right, for the first month. Warn as a phase is profiling. Warn as a permanent state is surrender with a dashboard attached. Or maybe you're thinking, I'm not failing a production load over a mail-formed value in a comments field. Also right. But notice what that proves. A check nobody acts on wasn't worth writing. You don't need 300 checks you'd never enforce. You need the handful you would. Suspect 2 is quieter, and this is the one that implicates us. Start with promotion math. There's no packet for the incident that didn't happen. A quarter of silent, boring, correct tables doesn't make a story. The heroic 2 in the morning fix does. So attention drifts toward firefighting, and the checks rot in the dark. Then there's why the framework got installed at all. Usually it's the quarter after a painful incident. Leadership keeps repeating, we need to get serious about data quality. Installing a framework is the fastest way to make that sentence stop being said in meetings. The framework did the job it was actually hired for before it ever checked a row. I have real sympathy here, because I find the install move tempting too. A framework is finishable, you can demo it. The actual discipline never is. And the deepest cause of all, the expectations were never negotiated. The data team wrote them alone, guessing at what good means. Upstream never agreed to deliver it. Downstream never defined it. So when the source changes and the check fires, what promise was broken? There was no promise. Just a hopeful assertion in a repo the producer has never opened. Now let me steelman the other side properly. The installed framework genuinely earns its keep in a few places. If you're in a regulated environment, the artifact is partly the point. An auditor wants to see controls, and coverage plus documentation is the deliverable. Fair. And if you're onboarding a table you don't understand yet, warn mode is exactly correct. Profile first, enforce second. And living frameworks do exist. I've seen teams where a failed expectation quarantines the batch and pages a named owner. The publish stays blocked until a human signs off. Ask them the citing test and they answer in seconds, with a date. So the pattern isn't that frameworks can't work. It's that installing one is the first 10% of the work. The celebration happens at exactly that line. Here's the reframe this episode has been walking toward. Data quality is not a framework you install. It's a contract you enforce. And a contract has 3 properties an artifact doesn't. First, contracts are short, and every clause matters. You write the handful of checks that would have caught your last 3 incidents. On the tables your company actually argues about. Start from the postmortems and work backward, not from the column list forward. Second, contracts have names on them. Every check is owned by a person who answers 2 questions. Why did this fire, and why didn't it? A channel is not an owner. Third, contracts have consequences. A violated expectation fails the update, or it routes the bad rows to a quarantine table someone has to clear. If a violation changes nothing, it isn't a contract, it's a suggestion. And the part that makes it an actual contract, it's negotiated. You sit down with the producer and the consumer and agree on what good means. After that, a violation is a broken promise someone answers for, not a metric drifting in an unopened dashboard. Put differently, you don't find the Yeti by photographing more footprints. You find it by staking out the one trail it actually uses. A handful of enforced checks on the revenue table produces more sightings than 300 bronze warnings. That's what I've got for you today. So here's the homework. This week, run the sighting test on your own platform. When did your data quality setup last catch a real incident before a human did? If there's a date, protect that framework. It's a rare animal. If there's silence, what you have isn't data quality yet. It's folklore. And look, if you come up empty, that's not a verdict on you. The pattern is bigger than data quality. Test suites, disaster recovery plans, documentation standards. Anywhere the artifact gets celebrated and the function never gets verified, a Yeti moves in. If this episode landed, send it to whoever owns your expectation suite. And if it turns out no one owns it, well, now you know which conversation to have on Monday. See you next time.